you want to bring in our first guest?
Yes, our first guest today is Martin Forde KC, who's King's Counsel. The reason why I wanted, hi Martin.
Hi.
Hi, my darling. The reason why we wanted Martin to come in today is not just because of his knowledge, but he was for those who don't know, he was the architect of the Windrush compensation scheme, which is something, as you all know, is very dear to us. We will really do whatever we can in talking about the Windrush program, and Martin has played a major part in this. So thank you. Welcome, Martin, to our show.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, it's good morning. Yes, on a bank holiday as well. Really appreciate you coming on. So Quincy, we met him before. So do you want to kick things off?
Yeah, I want to say I referred to you as a young man. Yeah, I know you've got because you don't look your age, sir. You look very well. What do you do to keep yourself looking healthy, looking and keeping fit?
I've got teenage twin daughters that I run around behind. That's probably the easiest exercise for me. Anyway.
Yeah, I know about the twins. So, Martin, I want to ask you, King's Counsel, and obviously behind the Windrush compensation scheme. I just want to know, what's your stress levels been like since the kickback of the Windrush compensation scheme dealing with our current government? What's your stress levels been?
I found the whole thing really very, very disappointing, and I'm just very, very frustrated. I've never worked with big government before, and I'd been warned the Home Office were not the easiest to deal with. And I think one of the problems with the culture of the Home Office is they just don't trust anybody. And I was trying to explain that the affected cohort of claimants, my late parents' age, I mean, they came in 53 and 55 or younger, were fundamentally honest. And they were people who were easily put off claiming, because when has big government ever worked for them? It's done nothing for my community as far as I can see. So this, to me, having caused so much pain and suffering, people deported, people detained, people losing their jobs, denied access to the health service, grandchildren not being able to go to university. Here was an opportunity for them to say, not only we're righting wrongs, which just comes out mantra-like, but we are going to demonstrate to you as a community that we can treat you fairly, and we are sincerely sorry for what happened to you. And all I have found, regardless of the design of the scheme, is that certainly the legal advisors to the Home Office, who are known as HOLA, whom I know Jackie does battle with all the time, just seem hell-bent on putting as many obstacles in the way of claimants as they possibly can. I explained they got into the mess they got into because they demanded documents people didn't have, and the approach had to be fair to generous and not document heavy. So what do? They send people letters with 23 requests for documents going back, 30 years. They don't pay interim payments. They talk about concepts like mitigation of loss, which is only known to lawyers. Behind my back, having given strong advice that past criminality, as a matter of law, should not reduce compensation. It's irrational. Be struck down by a court. They put it in anyway. And I said at the time, resignation issue for me. I don't want to look a fool in front of my legal peers. They were so concerned because of the optic of somebody of Caribbean heritage walking that they asked me what would make me stay. And I said, if I can say publicly, you ignored my advice. So here am I telling you that. And then I decided I would try and stay on board. I'm proud of a few things. I'm proud that, particularly looking at my mum and dad, I knew the cohort were aging. So it was designed to allow claims to be inherited. We got the Home Office to pay for people to get probate. We also agitating still to get people's loss of pension paid. But I'm very disappointed. I think the caliber of people dealing with the claims, I know they do their best. They're not lawyers, and these claims are complex. I think they're taking far too long to process. Complete lack of publicity. because if you look at the EC national scheme, you know, there were bus shelters, there were battle buses. Lambeth, my borough, had a dedicated helpline, and I protested to them and said, where's the Windrush line? The local authorities know where the affected cohort live. They know the people they've denied social housing to, that they may have forced into private rented. There must be hostels with elderly West Indians that have been rendered homeless, who simply ought to be asked proactively, how did you find yourself in this situation? We all know the areas where the Caribbean communities live all around the country. You know, Liverpool 8, Chapeltown in Leeds, St Paul's in Bristol, Brixton, Handsworth. You know, it should be a real publicity drive in those areas. I mean, just to give you an idea of the sort of thing that makes me really angry, I'm a big cricket fan, and there's an app that my son told me about where you can listen to stations all over the world. So I tuned into Barbados radio to listen to a test match between the West Indies and Sri Lanka. And in the drinks interval, there was an advert, radio advert, not for the Windrush compensation scheme. I'm really worried that there are people still trapped in the Caribbean, but for the EC settlement scheme. It just struck me as ludicrous. You know, we are owed far more by the governments of this country than the members of the European community in terms of our lengthy history going back 300-400 years. We're not, on the whole, mistreated. We've been subject to appalling racism. We've not been given the opportunities we should have been given. I think my parents were lied to when they were told, come to the mother country and she'll welcome you to her bosom. And there are serious errors being made. Jackie has a case where a gentleman was told twice that he didn't have a claim, and he completed the forms himself. He's a teacher, so he's an intelligent man. Jackie's firm then got hold of it for the second appeal, and he was awarded £289,000. Every single case that those caseworkers handled needs unpicking. Every case needs looking at again. I couldn't make a £300,000 error in my job and not be sued, and possibly so professionally embarrassed it would be career ending. And I think the last thing I'd say is that when I look at the infected blood, which was a judge-led inquiry, and I look at the postmasters, which is a judge-led inquiry, I know Mr. Justice Wynne Williams personally extremely well. I know Mr. Justice Langstaff a little. I've done a couple of cases in front of him. I mean, you know, high caliber legal brains working through the evidence, coming up with a report. Windrush, I think, was a bigger scandal than the postmasters. Involved many multiples of people more. They have, administering their scheme, lawyers paid for on both sides, by the post office. I think 2 or 3 retired high court judges and 6 forensic accountants working out their claims. Wow. And when you think of somebody who may have lost their job, then their home, then may have lost the equity in their home, then may not have been able to pay for private rented, then possibly detained, sofa surfing, that then diminishes their pension. Some didn't have access to bank accounts, even when their pension was paid. It couldn't be paid into anywhere. All these things going on, complex hybrid claims. You cannot put the onus upon an elderly cohort to put the claims together unless you are proactively saying, you say you suffered in this way. How did other members of your family suffer? I need to speak to your partner. I need to speak to your children. Did any of your grandchildren have difficulty going to university? You've got to go looking to maximize claims. And that's the problem, is that what we lawyers call the tort fees, the wrongdoer never calculates the damages, because there's a clear conflict there. And although initially I thought the Home Office had to administer the scheme because it was coming out of their budget, I've become more and more convinced over time that they lack the compassion and the empathy and, quite frankly, the common sense to get the money out the door in sufficient, fair amounts.
That's
bit
really...
of a rant, sorry.
Carry on.
I was just saying it's a bit of a rant, for which I apologise.
No, because it was brilliant having Jackie on last week with her perspective. Did I send you that clip? Did I send you the one?
No, but Jackie and I have, I mean, you know, the last 6 years, we've both been banging our head against a brick wall, really.
Okay.
And in fact, I send people to Jackie who have had nil awards, because the government support at the moment is 3 hours to go through possibly, you know, many, many decades of pain and no legal aid.
So Jackie last week was fantastic. And the fact that we've sent out her clip, I'm going to send it to you after the show so you can see what she said, was compelling. And we've had so many comments. But you, again, have come from a different perspective as being the person who actually created, you know, the compensation aspect of it. And last week was painful. But what you've just said has got to me even more this time. Yeah?
Well, I know how I intended that it work. And I'm not seeing what. So for instance, the community's not very good about discussing emotional impact of what they've been through. My father was the kind of man that saw admitting pain as weakness. Everything, as far as he was concerned, could be cured by TCP and ice. You know, anything beyond that you didn't need.
And back to
and maybe some cod liver oil thrown in. But I know the community, and as I said, my father's generation in particular couldn't lie, but they also be very reticent about admitting pain and suffering. So they need very, very sensitive, culturally appropriate handling. They don't like dealing with monolithic, as I said, big government. I know of 2 women that were both threatened with deportation who were at primary school together and met every week for a coffee, and neither told the other that they'd received those letters, because some people felt they'd let themselves down by not regularizing their immigration position, and they were embarrassed. And even within families, you had situations where quite often the sisters had sorted out their nationality status, but the sons hadn't. We also have a number of members of our community who were in jobs that paid insufficiently well to allow them to travel abroad. So the only thought they would have had is, I need a rainy day sum so that if anything happens to anybody back home, I get to a wedding, I can get to a funeral. So there was no point in them basically purchasing a British passport every 10 years at, you know, 70, 80 pounds a pop. Now I think it's over 100, that they knew they were never going to use. It's far more likely they're going to get a phone call. Your mum's not very well. We think you need to get out here, apply for your passport and get on a plane within 2 or 3 days. Otherwise, it's just dead money. So I just feel that there's no real compassion and understanding being brought to the assessment of compensation. And then you can't do everything on paper. In my game, if somebody says they're psychologically or psychiatrically affected by treatment, you would get an expert report. If you could, you would assess it on paper. But if you could not, you would have a kind of tribunal. One of my very early proposals was get somebody like me chairing, get a psychiatrist, psychologist as a wing member, maybe get a member of the community as well, and meet the person and tease out their story. Because that's what used to happen. I don't know if you remember with Anthony Bryan, when his children went to him and said, by this time I think he'd been detained at least once, if not twice. Oh, I've just read about this lady. When a media gentleman first broke the story, Paula being detained. It sounds like you, Dad. We need to run a campaign. His immediate reaction was so typically West Indian male was, then everybody's going to know my business. You know, so unless you know how to tease these stories out of people, and it probably means having them dealt with by people that look like them, understand their culture, and as empathetic, more than sympathetic, really, really understand how our elders behave, how close they can be about suffering. You're never going to get a satisfactory compensation scheme without dedicating time. And I know Jackie's told me that sometimes it's taken her a couple of days to get the full story, sometimes through tears, sometimes just a wariness and lack of trust of lawyers. And, you know, she spent days with people getting the full picture as to how they suffered. And that needs to be, if the government was serious about this, and I have asked David Lammy if there's a possibility of a Labour Party manifesto commitment to legal aid, you would get legal aid. They'd have a proper panel of experts. And I actually think processing the claims at the other end for the Home Office would be quicker and more efficient, because you'd have a lawyer drafted document with all the supporting documents. You know, I know some of the people affected may have moved 7 or 8 times, and they're not going to have their passport from the 60s. They're not going to have their proof of address. One gentleman I know of happened to be, by pure chance, speaking to a caseworker about a primary school he'd been to, trying to establish that he hadn't, as the Home Office seemed to think, decided at the age of 70 that he was going to leave the Caribbean and live in this cold, miserable place. And he mentioned a school, and she knew it had been knocked down because she was from the area and turned into a multi-storey car park. So she was able to say, you would never have known of the existence of that school, which was demolished 35 years ago, if you hadn't actually been there. But had he not coincidentally had his meeting with her, he might have found himself on a plane.
Can I just say, Martin, you articulated the fact of your frustrations working with the Home Office and the government and how they've handled things. I want to know from yourself, that, and I've said this openly to radio stations and people in similar backgrounds as yourself in your profession. Do you think that the government and the Home Office look at Black struggle, Black plights, they look at us as subhuman? Because we're seeing, so I'm just saying, we're seeing examples you've given with the post office scandal being sorted. We've seen the Hillsborough 96, that being sorted. We are going to be seeing the compensation for the COVID and the vaccines, that's being put into place. But this Windrush has been going on. So do you feel they look at us as we are subhuman?
I wouldn't go as far as that. What I will say is that I don't think, and Wendy Williams' report kind of mentioned this, I just don't think there's any real cultural understanding. So as I've said, knowing these people are stoical, they're not complainers, their lives have not been great, and they just tend to shrug their shoulders and get on with things. So you're going to have to tease the information out of them. There are also, I think, elements that feel that people will try and, as I said, there's no trust there, play the system. I never saw that happening with the affected cohort or their children. In the very early days, I was being told that they wanted to reduce compensation if people had criminal records, and that's when I advised that was irrational. But the assumption that the cohort would inevitably have criminal records is what I found really disturbing. Jackie was told upon my appointment, oh, you should be happy we found, then I was a QC, a Black QC. It's got nothing to the point. Am I good at my job? Do I know what I'm doing? Can I design a scheme? I wasn't there for the optic. But when you feel you're being discussed in those terms, it makes you wonder whether or not there is a real commitment to righting wrongs. And I've heard that phrase so often from Home Office ministers and junior ministers. And I think with the honourable exception of Amber Rudd, who was clearly very moved by the plight of some of the members of the community that she found affected, I just didn't see any warmth, any understanding, any shame that this had been allowed to happen. So I think, I wouldn't say subhuman, but definitely second-class citizens who don't count. It was almost as if none of us would have had good jobs, none of us would have lost much by way of earnings, most of us would have been on benefits. I mean, the narrative around the Black community is not that it's aspirational and successful and a net contributor to the economy of this country. It's that we have a criminal gene, and if we're not good at entertaining white people as footballers or rappers, we're utterly worthless. And they made a terrible mistake in bringing us over to do the jobs they don't want to do. I know, because if I get up early and I have to go into work, and I look at who's queuing at the bus stop, or who's getting on a night bus to go and do a late shift in a hospital, it's a predominantly unsocial hours in this country, predominantly the preserve of those of us of migrant heritage. And I suspect if every person of colour said, I am not going into work for a week, this place would fall apart. But we're not valued. We're just not.
Sorry, Denise, sorry, I will be sorry. I apologise. It just, what you just said there, and Denise, hear what Martin just said, the fact of the comfortability. You're dealing with people who feel comfortable to tell you, we want to cut back the compensation scheme if they've got a criminal record. That's where their mind is. That's what you're fighting against. So that's why I posed that question. It's like, well, you clearly look at us as subhuman, or as second-class citizens. Because if you're going into a conversation thinking like that, and as we're seeing with the voting system, you can only have voter ID to go and vote now. There's a class of individual which sections of society look down upon. So yeah, that's why I brought it up. Sorry, Denise, to cut
But
you.
if you think, I was just going to say, if you think how civil servants are selected, and if you think of how few civil servants of colour are in senior positions, they've got very, very narrow lives. I suspect that, you know, the majority of the people working within the Home Office at Marsham Street, I can't speak for the other areas. I found Liverpool and Sheffield much, much warmer in terms of their staff. I wonder whether somebody of colour's ever set foot across their threshold. They definitely see us as kind of curious figures. The right-wing press obviously peddle many negative myths about us. And if you don't know any black people, you haven't met black professionals or people working in the media such as yourselves, then you're going to believe that narrative, which is basically, you know, we're all drug smoking, members of gangs. If we drive a nice car, it's not because we work hard, it's because we must be a drug dealer. And that narrative is pushed over and over and over again. And I think one of the issues for me also is that sometimes I found when my dealings with the Asian community, they've also swallowed that narrative. And more disturbing still, I've been in conversations certainly with members of the West African community who've asked me what part of West Africa I'm from, because I'm in a suit and I'm off to the Home Office. And I said, well, I'm actually from the Caribbean. I'm half Bajan, half St. Lucian. And they'll turn around to me and say, but you don't sound like a Jamaican. And I said, but there are other islands. And just recently, I don't know if you've seen a young man on YouTube who's been coming from Ghana and going around the Caribbean. They are not taught anything about their connection to us. And they are also taught to look down upon us as well. So I do feel that there is this constant narrative, particularly through the right-wing press, you know, that we are overly involved in crime. So I had Mark Rowley the other day saying, oh, we're 13 times as likely to be stabbed if we're young black men as young white men. I think so much depends on a more subtle approach to examining who's responsible for knife crime, because I think the assumption is it just involves Afro-Caribbean boys. But when I look at the names, I'm seeing more West African names, more East African Somali names, Moroccan names, you know, but they'll just be lumped together as black, and everybody equates black with
So one second, Martin. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to continue the conversation with Martin Forde KC and our Denise. Come across the Quincy Presents. We'll continue the conversation. Sorry, Martin, go on.
Yeah. So I was just saying that. So I think that, you know, quite ingrained into the British psyche is this idea, you know, that we do low-paid jobs or we're involved in criminality, and therefore they probably thought, well, these people wouldn't have lost very much. You know, a lot of them would have been on benefits. A lot of them would have. But I am aware, and as they call the Windrush generation, but it is generations. I met young people who, because their grandparents and parents couldn't prove their status, were told they could only go to university as foreign students, which is about 4 times as expensive. And then, of course, that's impacted upon their life chances, getting a degree, getting a better paid job, etc. I don't think that those assessing the compensation have the first idea how to calculate those losses. And even as a compensation lawyer, for me, it would be complex, because it's kind of loss of a chance of a better career. There's no guarantee that just because you get a degree, you'll get a very well-paid job. But you'd have to look at comparators and say, so what does the average graduate in this subject earn? How long does it take them to get their first job? What's their likely career progression? That's not something that you can do, I think, sitting as a caseworker, working for the Home Office, without a legal qualification as well, because then it's not lawyers that are calculating these claims. It's these difficult claims. So
thanks, Martin. So one of our friends to our group here is Glenda Caesar. You know Glenda quite well.
I know Glenda very well, and she's done wonders. She got the mitigation of loss argument thrown out, but I think it's now snuck in again, because as a qualified medical professional, one of the arguments that was being run early in the design of the scheme was, well, if you're a nurse and you lose your job, why wouldn't you take a job as a cleaner? And I said, I beg your pardon. Why should they, if they've got a nursing qualification? And of course, if the job centre offer you a job as a cleaner, then you say, I'm sorry, I'm not a cleaner, I'm a nurse, then you get sanctioned for not doing any job. So the whole thing just unravels completely. So I think in Glenda's case, she thought, well, do you know what? The best benefit I can be when I'm having these difficulties is to help I think it was her daughter, look after her children, her grandchildren. So she basically had a career break, so that it would enable the next generation to maximise their earnings.
So just to say my 3 little points, in terms of Glenda, just a lot of people don't realise, when we talk about the Windrush generation, we're not necessarily talking about people who are 70 plus. Because
I think there's plenty of people in their 40s, plenty.
Well, Glenda's son, remember, Glenda's son went to Dominica because she wasn't regularized, and he went on a Dominican passport as a young person. And when he tried to come back into the country, they made it very difficult for him. He got through, but that's because so don't just think because he was a young person. He was probably like a late teenager, like 19 or something like that. So that was one thing that's got me, that people need to realize what it means to be part of the Windrush generation. Secondly, I suppose I find it difficult because of the work that I did with the Ukrainian group of people. I've been very involved. I ran a project for a local authority, and I found it very difficult because when I think about medically, about people for the Windrush generation who've not been able to go to a dentist, can't go to a doctor because they're out of fear that something might happen, they may get caught up in a system. And then I know that you can't compare it the whole way, because I've been thinking about it since last week's conversation with Jackie. But I know that I've got people who came in from the Ukraine who haven't been here for a year, and they've had hip replacements, they've had knee replacements, they've had issues around prostrate, they've been resolved. And they hadn't even been in this country for 12 months. I found that difficult, knowing what the people who are my people around me who are petrified.
Well, and people who've been here paying tax and national insurance for decades don't get that kind of treatment. But I mean, there are two groups, and I'm not in the business of setting up one group of migrants against another. But I do think this is very, very racially motivated, I'm afraid. So you can come from Ukraine and you can draw a certain amount of support and benefits, and the families get paid. And it was all, we feel for Ukraine's. Worried about net migration, 150,000. We know how the Ukrainians were treating black students. They weren't even letting them on the plane when they were trying to flee to Poland. I've heard a host saying that her Ukrainian guest was complaining that her son was going to a school with too many black people. So there are some issues, certainly. I know because of the lack of black people in Eastern Europe, with attitudes towards black people among Eastern Europeans. And I've met many, and we've talked very candidly about it. And it's all about a lack of exposure. But the other group that I think are treated remarkably favourably, the Hong Kong Chinese, and there are 150,000 of them. And they're not really at war, but I think geopolitically, to say to the Chinese, the mainland Chinese, if you don't treat these people well, they have a safe haven, is about geopolitics. But at the time that the scheme was announced, I was talking to a senior official at the Home Office, and I said, look, I've got nothing against the Hong Kong Chinese, but you leased Hong Kong for 155 years, and you knew you were going to have to give it back to mainland China. You knew you were going to have to give it. And as you were leaving, you doled out British Overseas Territory passports. And but you gave my parents a CUKC passport, which is far less valuable than a BOT passport, conning them into thinking that they would be full British citizens, which they weren't. My parents naturalised in the 70s, by which time my dad had been here 22 years, paying tax and national insurance, and did 2 years national service in the RAF, but still wasn't British as far as the Home Office were concerned. He was sent a letter telling him that he should apply for a passport to the Barbados High Commission when he was fully entitled to a British passport, because he'd been here for more than 5 years pre-1971, and saying that once he decided whether he and my mum were going to get Bayesian passports, and they got it wrong with her because she was actually St. Lucian. They would then decide about my brother and I getting our British passports. We were born here. We were automatically entitled to a British passport. So even going back to the 70s, that I would say the hostile environment started from 1948, quite frankly. So there is this disparity in treatment. There's disparity in compassion. And I said to them, so you were in the Caribbean for 350, 400 years, enslaving my ancestors, getting free labor, although according to Kemi, they made no profit. Well, I'm telling you, if they made no profit in 400 years of free labor, they are the worst managers of money the world has ever seen. Plus, when the owners were paid, the equivalent of billions, that all got invested in the infrastructure. So Gladstone's father, for instance, invested in Great Western Railway. So whenever I get on the train at Paddington and go west, I think my ancestors paid for this with their blood, sweat and tears. So that's an absolute nonsense. But I said, why do you feel more loyalty to people whose land you leased for 155 years, knowing you were going to have to give the land back, than people you enslaved for 400? Couldn't answer the question.
And not just that, people who helped you in a war. Two wars. Yeah. Who helped you? Are you painting a picture to, and it ain't just West Indian, the Caribbean communities. There was obviously the Asian communities who assisted.
Yeah.
Your winning of wars were assisted by immigrants. That's the bottom line. And even then, still given the worst jobs probably within those army barracks.
My dad remembers the tins rattling outside the schools in Barbados to help the war effort. And those little islands, poor as they were, raised the cash equivalent today of £43 million towards the British war effort, even though they barely had a halfpenny to rub together. That's how loyal they felt to England. And I think one of the problems was that the political classes knew the country needed rebuilding and knew there was a source of cheap and available labor in the Caribbean and elsewhere within the Black and Asian Commonwealth. They didn't actually explain to those who would now feel that we're competition for them in the job market, for instance, and we're changing the culture of Britain. You know, it's a thinly disguised, if you like, Keep Britain White campaign, which is why I suspect the Ukrainians are more welcome than people of colour. And we possibly need to have an honest conversation about that at some point. But, you know, we're here and we're here to stay, and we came by invitation. My father became very aware of the fact, particularly when he did national service, that had never been explained to the white working class and lower middle class. They rather felt that, you know, these people had been imposed upon them. They were never given the rebuilding message. We were inviting these people. And that's why when I was a child, people say, go home. I go, well, what home? Do you want me to go to 7 Ember Road in Langley? Where's home? I was born here. My parents were invited here. Now, that message was never got across. And in fact, my dad knew more about this country than the people he worked with. He went for a job in Leicester. He was a printer. And he got asked a couple of questions. Where did you learn to speak English? So he said, well, that's the language they speak in the Caribbean. And this was an owner of a print work, so he couldn't have been an unintelligent man, but they just blinkered and they're not interested. They're not curious about people or other cultures. And said, what part of India is the West Indies? And given that my father could have told you at the time, the height of Ben Nevis, the capital of Pakistan, he was told, you know, went to school, left school at 13, but all the pink bits are ours, and they were made to learn. Capital cities throughout the empire. Heights of mountains, sources of rivers, population of Birmingham. He knew all this before he even arrived here as a 22-year-old, because that's how he'd been taught. Yeah. So he knew, he was more British than the British. Did you know there were 4 verses of the national anthem? Because my father knew all 4. He was belting out the second verse. The first time he went to the cinema in this country, they played the national anthem. He stood to attention because that's what he'd been taught to do. They start playing, you know, God Save the Queen, and he's all ready to sing the second verse. And he said all the teddy boys were going out to have a cigarette. They didn't even respect their own anthem. But, you know, he'd have got the back of a ruler on his head if he hadn't been standing up straight whenever the national anthem was played at school.
So, Martin, you're a KC, okay? You've worked hard. You've got all your qualifications. but would you say, how are you respected in your profession? And I'm sure you're the one who told me, did you leave something at work one night and you went back?
Oh yeah, no, I've been accused of burgling my own chambers by City of London Police. Yeah.
Tell us about it.
Well, I was actually looking for a book. We've got a rule to leave me a note.
Oh.
And a note wasn't
We
left.
lost you for a moment. You for a moment.
You got me back?
Start again. Yeah.
I went into chambers one Sunday night in a, I don't know, jeans and a leather jacket, and I was looking for a book, one of my textbooks that somebody had removed without leaving a note saying how long they needed it for or where I would find it. I had a fair idea who the culprit was. They were on a different floor to me, so I had to switch on lights on the landing. My room. Go into my room, not find the book, go upstairs to see if I could find it. As I located it, as I was coming out of chambers, 2 City of London police officers, I think, who thought that Christmases had all come at once, kind of pounced on me and accused me of burgling my own chambers. So I went and I pointed my name out on the board, and I'd actually had to get my robes, and I said to them, you know, this is my wig tin. Would you like me to put the wig on? You know, and I've been, you know, mistaken for a well-dressed defendant. I once went to sit as a part-time Crown Court judge in Birmingham. When I asked the security guards how I could get to the, you know, the judge's chambers, one of them said to me, "What do you want to know that for, mate?" To which my response was, "Because I'm the judge." You know, so yeah, it keeps you humble. I'm not too bothered by it. I had great support from my parents throughout my kind of educational journey. I had some fantastic allies. The dons that taught me at Oxford were very generous with their time. I have enjoyed being in the chambers that I'm in. I was the only non-white tenant for 11 years, but I've always felt supported by my chambers. And I think that you get taught, I think, if you operate in a predominantly white world, to use the fact you're conspicuous to your advantage, and you obviously have to be very resilient. I've tried to stay true to myself. I've got friends that have known me since primary school that I said when I was made a barrister, you know, I'm expecting you to tell me if you think I've turned into some kind of stuck-up idiot. And I've still got good friends that would say that to me. And as I said, the colour of my skin does keep me humble, because I am constantly challenged for being in a predominantly white space. But I've kind of lived by my dad's sort of adage, which is, you know, it's their country. If you want to achieve, you're just going to have to be better than them. And I see being made a KC as an illustration of the fact that I should be regarded as being in the kind of top 10% of my profession, and I've got there on merit. And you know, you're there to be shot down, but you can also use it to your advantage. So I know that if I appear in front of a judge once, sometimes after they've got over the initial surprise that the quality of my work is as it is, they don't forget me. And that sometimes unnerves my more conventional opponents, because they'll be introducing the parties and the advocates, and the judge will say, "I know Mr. Forde," or "I know Mr. Forde already." And so, as I said, I think I'm quite unusual, because I'm a civil practitioner. Most of my peers, you know, people like Courtney Griffiths and Ike Appiah operate in the criminal, John Femiello operate in a criminal sphere, but I don't. But no, as I think, sorry.
You're a medical KC, medical.
Yeah, I do mainly clinical negligence and the regulation of the health profession. So when doctors are up before their regulator, likely to rock off, that's the kind of work that I do. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Martin, your dad's Bajan?
Yeah, my dad was Bajan and my mother was St. Lucian.
What part of Barbados?
Spooners Hill. Do you know Woodstock Gap?
Yeah, Windrush Hill. Just nearby the cricket ground.
Yeah, exactly. And the stadium. I can see the stadium from my grandmother's house.
I just
and I used to walk from down Spooners Hill and then through Eagle Hall and Bank Hall to town. So I know it pretty well.
For my Bajan contingency, Eagle Hall. Eagle Hall.
I come from Black Rock.
Black Rock. So,
and then on my St. Lucian side, my cousins all speak patois, so I had to learn Sacafet Gasson, that kind of stuff.
One of the things I really am taking great pleasure in having this conversation with you and Denise is that I look at ourselves, as myself and Denise, as the gap between corporate and the streets, and how important it is for the two to marinate, to know these stories, because you're dealing with people, as in our parents and obviously their offsprings who are going for a harrowing experience. But I also recognize as well how the gap potentially is widening, because I've just come back from Barbados. I was speaking to people in Mia Motley's camp, so to speak. Well, she's aware of what's the Windrush and stuff like that, but just in that political, and there's a very middle class in Barbados.
Oh, very much so.
Very middle class, yeah. But
my aunt wouldn't let me go to town unless I was wearing long pants, even though I was on holiday.
So, and there are some still generations who still wear shirt and tie. You know what I mean? In 90 degrees, but that's by the by. But one of the things you mentioned earlier on is that we still do not know about each other's struggle, and we're clustered under one roof. I was amazed, and if you witnessed this, even in Barbados, when I spoke about the Windrush and the connection with Barbados and England, none of them knew. The people around me, they didn't know what I was talking about, because I said it isn't taught. So to get this compensation scheme really working, do we have to educate ourselves and build that connection back again? Not just with West Indians, but the Africans as well, East Africans, West Africans.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think we've all had similar issues. I think there's been a quite deliberate policy to keep the different cultures separate as well. And we should be mutual allies, and we should be networking a lot better than we do. I've heard a lot of chatter after George Floyd from the corporates, mea culpa, we profited out of slavery. Show me the money is what I'd say to Lloyds of London or Green King, who made statements. One thing I think would benefit both parties would be for there to be exchanges of teachers and pupils between the Caribbean islands and Britain. And the reason I say that is I was in St. Lucia last April for a family wedding, and I've got 4 children, but my younger 2 are twin girls, are now nearly 14. They'd been to Barbados at the age of 3, couldn't really remember it, other than one of the girls. My aunt asked me to wash a car, and so I went to wash a car, and Ava, one of my twin girls, came out and said to me, this is age 3, Auntie Sheila's very rude, Daddy. And I said, why? And she said, because you didn't say please. Because I, on the plane, been saying, you do your pleases, you do your thank yous, you ask to leave the table, you help with the washing up, you go and get the extra chickens. You know, I'd really kind of said, you mustn't let me down. So I said to her, this is how it works in the Caribbean. When your elder asks you to do something, you just do it. So I said, what do I have to do when I finish washing this car? And she said, I don't know, Daddy. And I said, I have to go and ask Auntie Sheila if there are any more cars she'd like me to wash, because that's how it rolls. So, and then this time, when they went back last year, it was so important for them to spend some time in a Black nation, because the same Ava said to me, I love it here. I love the beaches. I love the palm trees. I love my big family. And I look at the posters and the people look like me, you know, advertising insurance and banking and the television that she watched. And I just think she came out of there with a sense of pride in it. And you see Black professionals, you see Black bank managers, you see Black politicians, you see the MPs, you know, debating on television. I mean, everybody in Barbados, they're all quite argumentative, but they're very, very well informed. That's why Mia has a world view. You know, people don't know in England what's happening, you know, in the French elections or the German elections, or in Barbados, they know everything about world politics. It's just extraordinary. And the reason I'd like the teachers to go on an exchange, I think having some Black teachers come, professional as they are, with their inbuilt discipline, maybe to some of the more difficult inner city areas, would show white teachers what a Black professional looks like. So we don't have enough Black teachers. would give the children a sense of pride that these people are there and that they're good and they can control their lessons. And I think for the white teachers to go to the Caribbean or to West Africa or Asia and see the standard of teaching and the quality of education and the ability of these children who are committed to education, stimulated by education, would be a good thing for them. Because, for instance, when I was saying as a 14, 15-year-old, I fancied being a barrister because I was an argumentative child, really. I kind of got looked at pityingly, but you don't have a dad who's a judge and you don't have a mum as solicitor. You know, you're going to do all that hard work and get nowhere. And I think it was well-meaning. I don't think it's necessarily racist, but frankly, they could not see. They'd never met a black professional. So they'd be there thinking, well, I'm a middle-class white teacher. I don't have any connections to get my kid into the law. So how's this little black boy going to become a lawyer? And it was very much almost as if they couldn't even see me being a teacher. You see, I mean, and I think that's part of the problem. It's the mindset. And of course, you will live down to your teacher's expectations. The number of children I've heard say, and said, I live in Lambeth. I was a governor of a primary school, and we get those kids, you know, it's very Portuguese, very Somali, French, West African, mixed heritage, a real melting pot. And we get them by end of year 6 to be confident, to be articulate, to be able to speak up in assemblies. And you see them after one term in year 7, you say, how's it going? And they already feel crushed because they've been told they're rubbish. You're never going to be anything. You know, you're going to end up behind bars. That narrative is still being peddled at our children, and it's extremely damaging because, as I've said, I think you will live down to those expectations if you're written off. And then the only time these kids appear to be elevated, as I've said, is through music or sport. So it's, again, that I think the last bastion of racism is for somebody white to walk into a room, see a sea of black faces or black and Asian faces, and think the chances are this audience is more intelligent than me. I think they've got a real problem with it. And I think the intersectionality actually of race and gender is another one, because if I talk to my white female barrister colleagues, their struggle has been very similar to those of us of ethnic minority heritage, in the sense that the white patriarchy who dominate on the bench tend to make assumptions about your abilities, tend to think they're the best selectors of the most talented people. So they tend to look out for people made in their own image.
Yeah. Well, that kind of answered my next question, but so I can put that aside, because I've been thinking about, I know there are some young people listening in now, and obviously there are parents. Yeah. And I really wanted to hear from you. The things you've explained have been very good, but there are young people out there right now who are considering a career in law. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm like, and I think my difficulty is, like, when my niece qualified and she got her master's and she went and she did her degree and everything, it was getting a pupillage. She found it, as a black girl, she found it really, really hard to get into chambers. She really struggled, but she did battle on and she got through, but it was really, really difficult. So I wanted to ask you about, how do you encourage young people who are considering a profession in law? Because we do need more black KCs. We need them. Yeah, that's one thing. And my last question would have been, before you came on, we were talking about novelist Robin Williams, and whether you had any thoughts on that you could share with us. And that's me.
Yeah. I mean, on the first issue, I mean, it takes a lot of hard work. As I said, my father was a realist in the sense that he said, look, if you think about the white working class, you think about social mobility in this country, it's not great. You know, there are plenty of families who can trace their roots probably back to the Norman Conquest, who've yet to produce a professional. So for my parents to help me do that in a generation is, I think, pretty remarkable. My dad left school at 13. I am, to give you a flavour of what he's like, I'm standing outside Senate House in Cambridge and I'm waiting for my son to graduate. And I turned to my old man and said, so Dad, when you left school in Barbados, age 13, did you ever think you'd live to see the day when, having seen your eldest granddaughter graduate from Oxford on your 80th birthday, You'd be about to see your grandson graduate from Cambridge 2 days after your 84th birthday. And he didn't miss a beat. He just looked at me and he went, "It skips a generation." It's all down to the old man. So that
I can imagine the accent as well, man. It's skipping a generation.
But and he drove me hard. You know, it was very much that generation. You come back, you get 98 out of 100. How did you lose 2 marks? You never got praise for the 98. I used to say of my dad, you know, he'd ask me what 7 6s were before he said hello. So that was quite rigorous. I think because he never felt he belonged to Britain, but he thought that staying here, despite the prejudice, would give his children chances he never had. I think for my generation, we're less accepting of a lesser role and having to necessarily have to. And I think for the generation below mine, that they again feel more assimilated. So it's recapturing that drive. But I do think a big part of it is education, and a big part of it is that the expectations of our children are very, very low. As far as pupillage is concerned, I mean, I think there's a 1 in 10 chance of an interview for a pupillage, so it's very, very, very competitive. I think there are also issues around the cost of education, which the government must know impacts more upon those from less well-off backgrounds. I mean, I help sometimes with scholarships for Middle Temple, and the average debt that these youngsters are coming, you know, to the bar to do their bar finals, they're not even at the pupillage stage, is between £60,000 and £75,000. I mean, that would give me sleepless nights. I think that that generation are a bit more relaxed about it. But I think if I'd said to my dad, I'm going to be £75,000 in debt and I've got a 1 in 10 chance of an interview for pupillage, he would have said, get a job. Or he would have wanted me to try and to get my qualification whilst employed. Whereas these children think quite rightly, why should I? I'll do what all of my peers do. Yeah. But there's no doubt. I think it's really important through shows like yours and through just the network. I mean, the network I've developed, which includes obviously meeting you, Denise, through Windrush, is a network I should have had 30 years ago. I know you'd have been one then, Denise, but you get. Of
course.
Yeah.
I get it, Martin. I get it.
You know,
Of course I do.
I hadn't come across Jacqueline McKenzie, even though we're both lawyers, before 2018. Blondell Clough, who was born in the same maternity home as me a few months before, I hadn't come across. There's a whole net, and we've all been siloed. We've all been doing our own kind of little bit.
Siloed.
And what I hope is the legacy of Windrush will be, for our children's generation and our grandchildren's generation, that we will just get more organised. Because I do feel that my parents' generation were actually quite organised. In 71, when they were going to pass that act, which effectively meant they had to naturalise, they were the ones who lobbied Parliament and said, if we've been here for 5 years prior to the Act of Parliament, can we have an automatic right of abode? And that was a very clever amendment that they argued for. I think we sometimes sleepwalk into all kinds of things because we're not publicising things that are going to have a greater impact upon the Black community. And we just need to have people well positioned within the civil service, within government, within the health service. I mean, look at the outcomes for say, Black women and childbirth and general obstetric care. They're very poor. I've recently got involved in a couple of sickle cell cases. I did a case for Evan Smith, his parents are Ghanaian, who had sickle cell, went to the hospital that treated him. He thought in crisis, was only 21, only child, calling 999 from his hospital bed because he was in so much pain. You remember that case?
Yeah, I remember that case.
And eventually died, I think, on the 4th or 5th day. And in the inquest, the haematologist said, if I'd known any time in the first 3 days, I'd have transfused him, he'd be alive today. And I met a gentleman called John James, who runs a sickle cell society, and I've come across another very recent case in Kent that I'm trying to help the family and push that way. So their network is developing in that way. But then, just to tell you how it works. So Leroy Logan, whom I met through Windrush, went to the same church as the parents of that young man. They told him what had happened. He said, I'll get you a meeting with Martin. I then put them in touch with solicitors Lee Day, who's Jackie's firm.
Yeah.
We did the inquest for the family for free because they needed representation. You can't get legal aid. And then we did the civil action against the trust for them, which we did get paid for. But that was again the network. Although in tragic circumstances, that was the network working absolutely perfectly. I knew the best solicitors for them to go to for this type of case, and they had direct access to me with my experience at no cost.
That's great.
I just want to say there's a question there. You mentioned some high-profile barristers as well, and the KCs. A question there saying, do you know Stephen Akasangwa?
Very well, and I know he does brilliant work around pupil referral units. And in fact, we had a conversation last autumn when I said I'd really like to come and help him do some mentoring. But no, he's fantastic, and he's a really good figure. But you see, there are other people who are coming into prominence. So there's Jason Pitter KC, he's now leader of the Northern Circuit. He's Leeds-based, of Jamaican heritage, and he's the first black leader of the circuit, so a whole geographical area for barristers. And I think he's got a 3-year appointment. And John Femiela, who's just been defending in that case where the baby was found in the little bag, jury out at the moment. Obviously, Courtney Griffiths from way back, Ika Peer. I've got another very good criminal barrister friend called Michael Hall. We're dotted about. Winston Hunter in Manchester does the same work as I do. But yeah, I think we are getting the legacy of Windrush. I think has to be my generation getting our act together, then passing on that knowledge and those connections to the next generation.
Brilliant. That's fantastic.
I think Denise as well. Like what we're doing here and what Martin is speaking about, there is that connection of collabing together from all different walks of life, not just within your profession and your industry.
And I think we're going to have to do it for ourselves. This is the other thing. It's not something that anybody's going to do for us, unfortunately. Sorry, let me just get the screen back. What have I done with it? I went to comments.
My mum called.
Okay.
Denise knows it. Whenever I'm on the radio or doing shows, my mum will always call me and just say, ask me what food I wanted, or someone's probably listening to the show, and she said, and they probably called my mum and said, I got Ian San here talking to a man about liars and thing, and you know about man.
I didn't ask you where your family are from in Barbados.
So my mum is St Michael in Burnley by the statue Bussa, not too far from there.
Yeah, on the highway. Yeah,
on the highway. That's right. Yeah. It's why I love talking to the Bajans, because we always point out. Yeah.
You know why I know about Bussa? Because one of my St Lucian cousins is married to Ras Eiley, and he lives in Ruin Avenue. Yeah. Yeah,
Ras. Yeah, I won't tell you what he's saying, but yeah, big artist back in the day. Yeah, and my daddy's resting in spirit is in St Lucy.
Okay, so he's a country boy.
He's a country boy, yeah. Born in St Lucy, raised in...
St Lucy is very dear to my heart because my grandfather was a cooper, a barrel maker at the Mount Gay Distillery. So when I was 14, he took me up to St Lucy, and when he retired, as part of his pension deal, he got 2 bottles of Mount Gay every Friday night. So then it would come round and it was gone by Sunday. So
yeah, and you find Denise as well. Lucy, Denise, they speak because it's country, so they won't say, "Can I have that?" They will say, "Give me that here."
Yeah.
So my mum's sister, her husband is from St. Lucie, so they live in Canada, but I know that is exactly how they respond. But can I just say about his mum? I hope she's listening. But the best one for me out of all of them, so the Mets were doing the sort of hustings thing. What was it? Meet the Mets sort of thing, and they're going around.
The commissioner.
So to meet the commissioner. So what happened? Can you imagine? So Quincy's hosting this thing, loads and loads of people there, yeah. And then I was holding your phone. I was holding his phone in the audience because you wanted me to record what was happening. You wanted to record the show. He was just talking to Mark Rowley. And his mum rang. His mum rang. He's talking to the commissioner and his mum. She always picks the best times.
To ring.
To ring, but that was
and she knows what I'm doing. She knows what I'm doing. I was like, Mum, I'm going to talk to the police commissioner. Or I'm going to be. And she said, okay. And then within an hour, she said, "What are you doing?"
That was the best one.
I know the time is precious because there's so much we could talk about.
But what's she ringing? She's been to see if you want mac cheese and plantain with your Sunday lunch.
It's always about food or when I'm coming over or something like that. Yeah. So it's always something like to involve am I coming over. So God bless her. God bless her. You know,
you cherish her. You cherish her because you miss them when they're gone. I tell you.
Yeah, but I do. Denise asked you. There's a couple of just quick stories. Just want to just get your opinion about. So obviously, what's happened to Robin Williams? Obviously, the police officer who's retired. But most importantly, yesterday, if we can get it up, I went to the vigil of the young boy who was murdered, Daniel.
Yeah, that's terrible.
And obviously we know on the back of that. And I'll say this before we leave. I'm not an Arsenal supporter, but you know what? I've got to give it up to them because what they did at their home game, where they put Daniel's image up and they all clapped and they all cheered.
14th minute.
The 14th minute, 100. I have to give praises. I have to give it up to them. I don't want them in the league, but I have to give it up to them. You know what I mean? Because the week before, Mark Prince's son got booed by Leeds fans. So it just lets you know the different. But what I want to ask you before you leave here, and I did this ask you some more, but the man who killed Daniel, there's representation from both sides. Yeah. How do you get a case? How does that person get a case? Or not person, but how do a barrister get given cases, knowing fully and well that it's black and white, the evidence is there? Because to me, that's what's happened to that guy. That's a waste of petrol money. Just drive him to the prison.
Well, look, what will happen is that after his arrest, he'll be taken to the police station, and depending upon the state of the evidence, he'll almost certainly opt for legal representation. He might be told in the initial interview, don't comment because we haven't got all the forensic in, etc. Now, I know it looks very open and shut. I would have thought that one issue that will need to be explored is, was this man mentally unwell? I'm also very concerned that people have access to knives, our young people as well, with these zombie knives and things. I think they really should be banned, and you shouldn't be able to order them on the internet. And this kind of penchant for people carrying around these, foot-long samurai swords. But that poor young man, my heart goes out to his family. I mean, just, wrong place, wrong time, a complete innocence. But like yourself, I can't praise the Arsenal fans highly enough. I've not seen any press to suggest he's an Arsenal supporter. I know where North East London supporter, but I'm guessing he was. And they had the big banner as well, rest in peace. And I mean, the family must be devastated, but it was brilliant to see that they did that. But no, I think that just slightly change the subject, that whole issue kind of about knife crime and young men getting involved from our community. We will have to take some responsibility for that. I think we need to try. I know it's difficult as a 6'2", 14-year-old, but I had a conversation with my son saying, if you know anybody's got a gun or a knife, you need to come straight home. Just make an excuse and come home. Say my dad's just called me. But it is difficult, and I know for some children, this is the wonderful work that Stephen Akinsanya does with the pupil referral unit. The gang becomes more of a family to you than your own family. So there's a way to go. But I equally think that a lot of our very bright kids are excluded in very unfair circumstances and don't have proper advocacy. Again, I think there's a slightly stereotypical view. I don't know how culturally immersed some of the teachers are. I never looked at my father when he was disciplining me. I would always cast my eyes down. Now, my son got into trouble as a primary school child because the teacher said that he wasn't looking him in the eye and he was smirking. And I said, no, that's very much a cultural thing. If I look my dad in my eyes, he's telling me off, he would see that as defiance. You know, I have to slightly bow my head. And there's all these subtle little things. So I often think that these children are written off, or they have behavior ascribed to them as being insolent. You know, a number of times you hear, oh, he's insolent, or, you know, you can't be shy, you know, if you're not, you know. I've got, I did a parents' evening, and one of the comments was, you know, I wish you'd kind of participate a bit more in lessons. And I think my daughter's attitude is, well, I'm here to learn. I'm not here to kind of progress the lesson. I'm here to learn and to listen, and to have you disseminate information to me. It's, you know, I'm not really into audience participation. I want to concentrate on the job at hand. And sorry, what was the second thing you were asking about? So you asked about the sword guy and how to defend him.
And how you go about, well, not you, but how does he and the family get given these cases, and what's the procedures?
Okay, so the family won't have kind of their own representation, but they will have victim support. There'll be a prosecution side, be instructed by the Crown Prosecution Service, who prosecute the gentleman either for, I would suspect, murder, attempted murder, grievous bodily harm, because somebody else, they might do all three.
If you charge two murder and two attempted murders.
To murders, yeah, and it might even leave grievous bodily harm if they feel that the injury doesn't necessarily show an intent to cause serious harm. But they tend to go in with the highest charges when it involves police officers. So I suspect that will be the choice for the jury. And then whoever gets instructed by his solicitor, it's always a thankless task defending somebody when personally, you know, you may have a view as to their guilt or innocence, but they are entitled to be defended. And as I said, my strong suspicion is the issue in that case will be, was he mentally unstable or not? But there's no doubt, and I know people find this very frustrating, that there are people who will, you know, cause taxpayers' money to be spent in cases which are very, very difficult to defend. And one from the black community was the Lee Rigby case, where I think most lawyers sat there and thought, how on earth can there be a trial? And they refused to recognise the court, and there was a bit of grandstanding. But you know, our system is one where the jury decide, and I wouldn't have thought it would be too difficult for a jury to decide with appropriate help, because there would be psychiatric evidence. Was this man of sound mind or not? Could he form the requisite intention? And I know it's controversial for the families, because there was a family recently who are upset that somebody got a hospital order because they think he should have gone to a prison. We have many cases where people are sent to prison with a background of mental health problems, and within a very short period of time they end up being transferred to a secure mental health unit anyway. And then there's Quincy, there's a second topic. You said the
Robbie Williams.
Robbie Williams.
Well, that case, and as you can imagine, I've spoken to Leroy about it. I just really feel for this woman. I mean, I personally feel that the initial prosecution was a complete overreaction to something that was clearly inadvertent. And this poor woman has clearly suffered so much with her mental health and her fall from grace that you know, she can't continue. And I think it's terribly, terribly sad. And if, I don't know if anybody's listening from her family, but you know, if anybody wants to, you know, speak to me about the kind of support, because one of the things about doing clinical negligence is you get to meet good experts that she might need with her mental health or counselling, then my email's in the public domain. But I just think it's a terrible, terribly, terribly sad thing, and a woman who really should have inspired a bit of confidence in the Metropolitan Police, because there are so few. I think the only other senior officer I'm aware of whom I've met, who I think is excellent, is a woman called Alison Hidari. And and she gets it. I mean, I've had long chats with her about stop and search. I was depressed to hear the commissioner saying, it's a tool he wanted to use, because I don't know if you're aware of this. I think in the first lockdown, 25% of young black men between the ages of 15 to 24 stopped and searched. Again, depends how you define black. I'm aware of that. I think in 80% of cases, they took no action. 10, there was a caution, and 10, there may have been an arrestable offence. Well, I don't think, for the impact stop and search has on our young men in particular, that a 10% success rate means it's worth doing, because it alienates the community. What they need to do is they need to work with the community so they get intelligence-led information. The community are working with the police to help them bring those that we would regard as undesirable influences upon our children, hold them to account. But just a broad, well, I call it walking black, which not so much now, but used to happen to me in my 20s and 30s all the time. It's happened to my son. And it's the usual. Is this your car? What are you doing here? I've already told you about, being a kid, burgling my own chambers. It's a very very challenging area, and I don't quite know who we should have the dialogue with, really, because there doesn't seem to be very much of an opportunity to speak to people about why they hold such irrational views about people like us because of the colour of our skin. I would like, very happy to have a conversation. Say, why do you think you're better than me? I don't understand where you get that from. And why do you need to think that?
Yeah,
that's another topic of this is both sides, because we're, as black people, I feel we are being historically traumatized through treatment, as in slavery. We're witnessing with Windrush. So you imagine on the other side, if you've been taught from birth and all you've had is privilege, and all you've had is that you are the best, that's going to seep down, and you're going to acknowledge that. So at some point, we've got to find the balance of making both parties understand. Listen, no one's better than each other. And what we do know is the elites of society who play off on each other. And I think that needs to come across more.
But what's interesting is, if you watch kids at nursery, 4 or 5 years old, they don't have a racist bone in their body. This is learned behaviour. So it's not a natural condition for us to think that the racial characteristics make a difference to people, or that we judge them without knowing them. And I'm not quite sure at what point it starts to go wrong, and there needs to be a kind of hierarchy of hate, as it were. I have been, as I said, quite lucky in my profession. I've had more issues kind of outside work than within my working environment. But as I said, I still marvel at how and even if you look at things like, the footballers, they miss a penalty. They didn't miss a penalty because they were black. Why, but then they'll cheer them to the rafters. Or you'll see people being booed playing for England that are cheered playing for their club. And it's, you talk about Arsenal fans. Yesterday, I went to a game there years ago, and it was very obvious to me there was a section of the crowd that only ever picked upon their black players when they made a mistake. And it was all, you're not fit to wear the shirt and all this kind of stuff. Whereas I'm sure Declan Rice probably, for Arsenal fans is untouchable. But if Saka has an off game, I'm sure he'll cop it on social media. So it's it seems so deeply ingrained. It's quite depressing. But I think if people are curious about each other and they want to find out a bit about each other, and I think if our history is also taught in schools and not denied, because our history is entwined with their history, so we may as well find out, that lots of the pat ourselves on the back kind of thing because we abolished slavery. Well, look at the damage you did before you abolished it. Look at the exploitation, but look at the resilience of people who survived that terrible punishment and those terrible conditions.
Okay, just two quick little things. I think the the difficulty I think I have with this is when I look at, for example, the Met as a whole. When I look at the MPS, and I can't say what it is. I have access to a group where there are a lot of former, retired, and current officers in a specific group, and all the issues that would impact us as Black people, they have a lot of commentary on it. And to think that these are serving officers, and the things they say, what they said about all our cases from Stephen Lawrence down, it's very, very scary to think they are the people that, you know, our trust is in their hands. And it's hard for me. It's very often very hard reading. So I do struggle with that. And just to say to you, I really appreciate you coming on today. And because you help, you know, people like yourselves help to build our platform. Martin, if there are any people that you know that would come on our show, please let me know.
Will do.
Because you know, we're getting a lot of people viewing the show, talking about some of the commentary, appreciating people like yourselves. But if I would really ask if you know people that could benefit, that we would benefit from, or our community would benefit from hearing, that could inspire them, especially our young people, that could inspire them, especially in the profession in terms of their world of career choice or work, then please let's put them in touch with us.
Absolutely. On that last point with your group, like you, I find it disturbing. When Hester made the remarks he made about Diane Abbott, and he's gone to ground since, one of the lines that was being run by the Tory party, apart from the fact that he'd apologised, but he hadn't really apologised, it was a bit of a sorry, not sorry, was that he was in a private meeting. Now, I have to say, and I've been in private situations where either my presence hasn't been noted or it's unexpected. Racists speak the truth to each other in a safe space. So I personally think it's false, because they'll smile whilst they're stabbing you in the back in person, but they only really speak the truth. And I think one of the problems with social media is that people egg each other on and their behavior deteriorates as a result of it. I have found in my dealings with white authority figures, if I actually get them on a one-to-one and say that again, what did you mean by that? How do you justify that? They melt away. But the power of the group means that people think, I've got like-minded people, I'm in a safe space, we can say the most outrageous things. But most of the time, I think if you said to one person in that group, right, you come, meet me in this setting and say that to my face, they're actually quite cowardly when it comes down to it. But there's definitely, I think what lies behind a lot of this, and I blame the right-wing press. This country's 86% white, so it's not going, you know, completely black or brown anytime soon. They don't explain the need for migration, for the health service in particular, and for carers, because these are jobs the British clearly don't want to do, and somebody needs to do them. They don't seem to appreciate that the NHS would be on its knees without ethnic minorities and those of migrant heritage being an integral part of it, although the NHS bosses do understand and appreciate that. So it's very difficult, I think, when there's so much disinformation, because what the right-wing press do is they confirm white supremacy every time they can. Any famous black person they try and bring down, and they run negative stories about them. My father used to say to me, "You'll never be on the front page of the Sun unless you do something wrong." And I know if I was caught drink driving, it would be a top KC and drink drive scandal. But they won't say, "Oh, Martin Forde won that really important case for the Nation of Islam the other day," or anything of that sort. So it's very, very depressing. And I don't quite know. I think hating on us means that the majority of the population are distracted from a lot of things they should be considering. The health service, the infrastructure, the education system. But if you can keep kind of peddling this idea that if we got rid of all the brown people, life would be rosy, then I think that kind of, for them, confirms that it's acceptable to be blatantly racist when quite clearly it isn't. I've got hope for my kids' generation. I think they are a bit more bewildered by blatant racism and will call it out. but I do think we have a real problem still with education, particularly around black boys. I do feel I think our children are adultified too young. So a 13-year-old black boy is treated like a 25-year-old white boy when it comes to arresting them. I'm sick and tired of seeing 8 coppers surrounding a teenager in South London who's not going to go anywhere, doesn't need handcuffing. The whole experience is frightening and humiliating. And I just think you would not do that to a 13-year-old white kid. So they adultify our kids, they strip search our children in schools. And I don't know what they're being made to feel more scared of us as a presence. And I think what plays into that is that we're only really portrayed for our physicality. So therefore they, if you've got 3 perfectly polite, nice young men walking around in hoodies and they're all over 6 foot tall, you're supposed to fear them rather than say, there's 3 teenagers dressing like teenagers dress. So it's a difficult problem, but I think the negative media doesn't help. If I was a little old lady in Lincoln, I would think that all the crime in London was being committed by black people, because that's the way the campaign against Sadiq was run. It's knife crime, and knife crime seem to only involve young black men, and that's just not the case. Or if it is the case, they're not all Afro-Caribbean, and I do feel that knife crime is seen as particularly associated with Afro-Caribbeans. But when I talk to my friends who do crime, particularly the Old Bailey, they said they are seeing it, more numbers of people from East and West Africa coming through than they are people of Afro-Caribbean heritage. But the press aren't subtle enough to make the distinction.
Yeah.
We're coming to the end of the show. We've got literally about 2 minutes left. Martin and Denise, I think that another show in the future should be arranged, and not just that. I think an event and a live show where we're having the different disciplines under one roof. Because what I've got from this interview is we're all got the same struggle and how we're viewed and how we've been treated, from the Windrush generation to your profession, to me as a comedian, to Denise as a consultant. We've all got the same kind of struggle. It's been going on for the longest while. So on that note, I just want to say thank you, Martin.
No, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me. Enjoy the rest of your bank holiday. And
Thank you.
Ask your mum if she can put some of the food in some Tupperware for me.
Okay.
We'll catch up with you soon. Take
care.
care.
Darling, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.